Happy Friday, everybody. It's another Seminole Sidelines, and we are so excited to be so close to football season. It's just a couple of weeks away from kicking off. We actually will be out there this week when Florida State does kick off the practice portion of the fall schedule, and so we will have full coverage for you. This is Seminole Sidelines. We're going to talk about the week in Charlotte. We were just there for ACC Kickoff. I'm Ariya Massoudi alongside Curt Weiler and Bob Ferrante. Fellas, the boys were the darlings of the ACC media days here this week. Clemson, obviously got a lot of praise, a lot of questions over a couple of days, but Florida State, you could see it from the attention from the national media, from other beats covering other ACC schools. They are ready for the season, and I think there's a lot of anticipation, Bob, from college football about the Noles potentially being back amongst the nation's elite.
As we left Thursday, I think Clemson was fielding a lot of those questions about what's the state of their program. Are they stable, ascending, trying to get back to the playoff, obviously, after not making it these last couple of years. I think the Clemson players, a couple of them being from Florida, were also fielding questions about playing Florida State, potentially playing Florida State twice between Clemson and then again in Charlotte in the ACC title game in December, because now we don't have divisions. So we'll see if that plays out. But I think very much the focus, as much as Mac Brown and Drake May and the North Carolina contingent will be talking to the local media, it felt very much like it was a Florida State Clemson-centric couple of days. Of course, after the Jim Phillips nonsense of what he really didn't say on Tuesday. But I think it's the question, I think, Ariya, you posed it to a couple of guys, is college football better when Florida State is better? Is the ACC better when Florida State is better? And there's that good competition between Florida State and Clemson. And we think that's the case. It's been a really competitive game these last 2 years, despite Clemson's wins. But again, the chance to have 2 rounds of Florida State Clemson is, I think, what really intrigues us about this season ahead.
Curt, the vibe was different, wasn't it? Walking around this year, it just felt a little bit different regarding the Noles from the expectations of the national media in the country.
Yeah, I remember last year leaving ACC Kickoff. I mean, we knew kind of going into that season, it felt make or break-y. I think the column I wrote coming out of that last year was kind of, it's a make or break year, both for Mike Norvell and for Jordan Travis in terms of how are their FSU tenure is going to be defined. And obviously both rose to the challenge now, and both, now kind of arrive in positions of power. Mike Norvell got praised a lot. Dabo Swinney praised him multiple times. I'm sure other coaches as well for the job he's done. It's the gradual build, but kind of the big leap they took last year. And yeah, the attention was there. It's the first time in a while. I kind of talked to Dabo about it. He's been a part of some Clemson Florida State games where kind of they both have legitimate national championship aspirations, but it's the first time in a while. And Dabo kind of quipped, I'm not sure it's better for Clemson when Florida State is good, because it obviously makes his job harder when Florida State's operating at peak efficiency, but I think it's undeniable it's good for the ACC.
Guys, I'm excited, and I think a lot of people are excited. Bob, you're right. I asked some Clemson players, asked a couple of Miami players too. Is the way I asked the Miami players was different than the way I asked the Clemson players. I asked the Clemson players, is college football better? I asked Will Putnam straight up, who considered Florida State heavily at a high school, being a Tampa kid. Does the ACC need Florida State? And he said, yeah, this conference is better when FSU's better. And he praised Mike Norvell. And he said, it's clear to everyone that Florida State's on its up and up. And Tyler Davis, Clemson D lineman, who also considered Florida State, fans might remember, FSU was in his finalists a few years back, said it's been, cool to see Mike Norvell do what he's done, and that we are going to have a big game this year. And he talks to Renardo Green, who's a former high school teammate of his, about it. And so the Miami players, I asked straight up, does Miami need to come back for the ACC? And they all feel the pressure. And I think FSU feels that pressure too. But something Bob and I touched on, guys, and we can jump into it. Florida State the players don't seem like that the pressure is getting to them, right? The height of expectations, they seem very calm. They seem very collected. They seem very mature. and they seem like they have a good head on their shoulders about the approach to this 2023 season. Jared Verse straight up asked, is FSU back? And he said no. He said, we might be by the end of the year. We look forward to trying, but we've got to win some games to really be back. And I don't know. To me, that stuck out as someone who's just like, I'm not going to let you bait me into something. We've got to earn this. Well,
and it stuck out from, if you remember, go back and watch the interview with Jared after the LSU game. I'm pretty sure after the LSU game last year, he did say they're back. It feels like maybe a emotional maturity stride of some more time in the program, of understanding. I mean, obviously it's easy to get caught up in that post-game moment after a big win like that one was. But yeah, no, I think they know the work that's ahead. I mean, I think it helps. I think the ACC moderator the other day said when Jordan was leaving his press conference, I think he's the first ACC player to ever come 3 times. And Jordan talked pretty candidly about, like, my first 2 times, I was a little nervous coming here. I think obviously the first time coming with Mackenzie Milton in 20 last year, kind of being the established starter. You knew he was going to be the starter. You didn't know kind of what he was going to give you. He hadn't been through an entire season healthy yet. You weren't sure if he could kind of make the strides as a passer that were needed to kind of get to that top tier of the ACC. And that's exactly what he did last year. And you talked about, I mean, that's a setting that's going to, Jared and Kalen, both pretty charismatic guys, is going to suit them very well. But yeah, no, they acquitted themselves nicely. I think they did a good job of kind of like you mentioned, not getting too many situations that could get kind of freezing cold take later. I think it's definitely a mantra of, we're going to let what we do on the field do the talking. And frankly, why wouldn't they win that with all they have coming back?
Without a doubt. I mean, Bob, it just kind of seemed like this team, and you and I even, I think, were not on a podcast or on StreamYard or on Seminole Sidelines, but we talked about how FSU had multiple guys that could have been asked to come and represent them in Charlotte. How impressive is that? I mean, the 3 guys who did it, obviously Jordan and Jared, but Kalen DeLoach too, they did such a good job of representing Florida State. It just kind of shows the maturity, I think, of that entire locker room down in Tallahassee.
I think the confidence in this team, Mike Norvell would say it's a roster that's appreciating the work, the journey from, that 3-6 season in 2020, but also it's the stacked talent, it's the experience, it's fighting through the losing, learning from those hard lessons, being an offensive lineman as a freshman, redshirt freshman, and making mistakes, but then growing into a role that you're more comfortable in. The portal, I mean, Mike Norvell's batting average in the portal is pretty darn incredible. And yes, we could have seen Johnny Wilson make this trip. Tatum Bethune would have been a good representative too. Fabian Lovett could have come back, another option there. Haven't seen Braden Fisk play, and I think everybody was a couple of guys mentioned Braden Fisk up there in Charlotte too. I think that was Kalen DeLoach and Jared Verse. So the volume, the quality and quantity of representatives, absolutely. I think, Curt, we were talking about this on the drive up. You were kind of going through the all ACC preseason teams in the past years. I know you've got the numbers maybe better than me, but this is a preseason team that when it comes out, we could see significantly more than in the past couple of years combined for these Mike Norvell teams, as far as just what Florida State guys were on these preseason teams.
Yeah, I think it was in the first 3 years on the Norvell era combined, they had 5 preseason All-ACC guys. And I think I voted for 10 Florida State guys on my ballot. I think the ballots are getting posted today. There was a lot of Florida State representation, and it doesn't feel homerish to do that. I mean, it's at every position, there's a guy who, if he's not making the team, is at least in conversation. And it speaks to, how far they've come and the impressive job Florida State did, not just getting talent, but retaining talent. So any of those second-year transfers, it feels hard for the first-year transfers to kind of make that, because often people will just consult kind of last year's ACC, may not go outside. But yeah, I think it's it speaks to how far the talent of the roster has come, no doubt.
Pat Burnham asking, could there be upwards of 10 Noles on this?
No, I think he's surprised I said 10 if I had to bet. How many did you have, Pat? How many did you have, Pat?
That's
You're not going to get an immediate answer there. But
I am curious. I will tell you that we will not post my my ballot on the Osceola this afternoon because I just went in and put Florida State like 90% of them, and my
that's what I thought.
My reasoning for it, I should say, and my rationale was that I think the rest of the media there was going to vote for all the Carolina guys in Clemson. So I was like, I'm evening this thing out. I don't trust those guys up there anyway in the Carolinas on Tobacco Road and their judgment of football. So I was like, anybody at Florida State, I had multiple going at each position. I'm like, we're going to get them some points because there's no way that any of the rest of these guys. And what do we have? We had like backyardfootball.com preview weekly, quarterly. What they were asking questions, and we had, JV football, Pop Warner, everydayweekly.com. I mean, it was just like, what is going on here with some of the media outlets that they credentialed. And that made for an interesting few days. And those of you who watched it on ACC Network, I do apologize for those press conferences because some of them were just like, all the good questions were being asked in the breakout sessions by real journalists. And shout out to Derek Satterfield, by the way, for getting us really a local beat private time with Mike Norvell and Jared Verse and Jordan Travis and Kalen DeLoach, because that ended up being probably the most valuable time that we had. And I think that's a good segue. What stood out about Mike Norvell's, we'll call it a one-on-one. It was like a 1-on-10 with all the guys who cover him regularly. But it was an intimate setting in a little ballroom, meeting room. Was there anything he said particularly that made you think on the drive home?
I mean, obviously he told the story of that he kind of, and I wrote it, the story's on the website. It was kind of the story of the day to me. He told the story of, I think, coming out of the 2022 spring practice over a year ago, before the 2022 season. He talked about telling Jordan Travis, go look at the FSU Heisman trophies. I believe you can win one of those, and kind of was like, so I think got asked like, why did you feel the need to do that? And he said something to the effect of like, I wanted him to know it's okay to believe that he could do something like that. And I mean, here's Jordan having, I think I looked yesterday, tied for the third best Heisman odds, kind of coming into the season. It's been impressive to witness what he's done. Obviously, I thought also he talked about, frankly, I mean, he has not hid away from the expectations. He has not Kirby smarted this offseason of trying to convince his team that people only think they're going to win 5 games and that kind of like nobody believes in them. I think they've kind of steered into the expectations, but he kind of talked about also with those expectations comes a new set of hurdles, and kind of you have to battle complacency. And I think he's been impressed with how this team has battled complacency. He kind of cited, I think, that 3 of the guys he thinks were the most improved in the spring were Jordan Travis, Jared Verse, and Johnny Wilson, 3 of your best players. And that kind of shows that there isn't any complacency whatsoever, where, I mean, there's something natural about that in situations like Florida State is in.
Bob, what stood out to you?
When we heard the Jordan Travis story, I immediately kind of eyebrow raised, right? Because he said that before the 2022 season even started, before, Jordan is really the full-time guy, and you've seen what he can do over a full season of body of work. There were a couple of moments where I think Norvell has his kind of, I won't say coach speak, but he has his talking points. He has his talking points of what he wants to convey to the media about his players, the state of the program. And I thought those were really good answers about just how far the climb has been. But there are other points where it was really cool because you'd ask a question about, say, newcomers who were impactful. And he's starting to think through names, and he's talking about Keon Coleman and the windmill dunk and jeans at his house. But then, Blake Nicholson, he says, yes. And it was just that moment of, that's a guy that, we recruited as a staff. We got him from California. We think he fits in just exactly what they're doing. So I think there were moments of just the body language, the candor there I think I really appreciated from him. And we've hit on this, but he appreciates how far this program has come. Admitting that in 2020, he thought he was going to win all those games. He thought Florida State was going to be really good right out of the gate. And yeah, we can talk about COVID, the transfers who left, the challenges of not having a spring, the offseason strength and conditioning, just a program that was behind already in a lot of standpoints before Norvell and the staff even jumped in. I think he was appreciating the journey, how far the players have come, how hard they've worked to get to this point. And I think maybe that's why the expectations don't feel so burdensome, really, because they have seen, they can appreciate as a program just how far they have come. The work has continued, like we've talked about. The hardest workers on the team are often the leaders, the veterans. They are setting a tone for the younger players. I think that's part of, again, you hear the word culture, you kind of question, it's an intangible, but it feels like a really good culture that Mike Norvell has built.
Spot on. It really does. And, another thing that really stood out to me, two things. One was, you guys have touched on it a little bit, but that 3-game losing streak last year, I think the consensus I got was they all felt like that's going to make them stronger this season, right? They had to learn how to lose games together, and getting that core back, getting a large group of starters back to kind of go through the fights. They really think that'll help them this year in the fourth quarter of close games. Maybe they'll be able to finish, and that's on his relationship with Jordan Travis. And the fact that, last year at exit meetings, he said, I want you to go see these Heisman trophies. I want you to go look at them. And I want you to start envisioning you getting one too, because I really believe that you can have one. That confidence that he's putting into Jordan Travis, it seems like we've gone from obviously on the field development, right? And that's going to continue for Jordan Travis on at Florida State. But there's also this, I think, instilling belief into your quarterback that he's going to be the leader of this group, and that it's less coach-driven leadership and more player-driven. And Jordan's always had those traits, and you've seen it grow from him year in and year out. But he's not a naturally born outward leader, right? Like, he's not the type that's going to go and talk. But I do think that this year he might be at his most comfortable doing that. And maybe that's the step-by-step process that Norvell's been trying to enlist in him over the years. Jordan Travis then commented later about what that belief means. And this is the most calm that Jordan has been. And you could argue he's the best quarterback in the ACC. And it's a quarterback group in the ACC this year that's going to be pretty good. Obviously, Drake May is going to get a lot of headlines, but could we look up at the end and see that Travis has had the better year? And not even personally in stats, right? But could Florida State be in a better position due to the leadership of a Jordan Travis when we're in week 12 of the season and we're really starting to talk about what postseason picture looks like? So those were some things that really stuck out to me. Is there anything from the players other than Jordan that you really liked? Curt, you had some funny moments with Jared Verse. What a personable guy, right? That's a guy who's going to do entertainment, I think, after his career's over for years to come.
One of my storylines going in was I thought he was going to be the star with how entertaining he was. And I mean, that's definitely, I think, was the case. I laughed at a few things. I mean, the moderator in the press conference, I think, kind of knew his reputation a bit and asked him about kind of his talking. And then how did Jared put it? He said, I'm not a talker. I just have casual conversations. And I think I asked him kind of a follow-up in the breakout room over what's your go-to line? And I think, what did he say? He said, first time I play against somebody, I always tell them, I'm going to break you down and rebuild you in my image. And that always bothers people. It's kind of, I think it riles people up and they're just kind of very caught off guard, because I would say that's some unusual talk, but we've seen that on the practice field. Obviously a little harder for us to see it in games. We're not right there like we can be in practice, but no, I mean, the personality is all the way there. I have a story that I published this morning about him and his journey. And I mean, he kind of talked about, I think I was a bit of a surprise last year. Some people I think I caught off guard. I'm not catching anybody off guard this year. So he talked about kind of having to elevate his game, find ways to kind of adjust to how people are probably going to adjust to him.
Do you feel like Jared Verse is on the verge this season of being an AP first-team All-American type? Could he win postseason awards? Are we going to see one of those great Florida State defensive end seasons that we've seen throughout the program's great history?
I think it's possible, Bob. I'll let you weigh in. I think it's absolutely. I don't have a vote on any of the preseason All-American stuff, but I'll be interested if he isn't. There's some other good defensive ends, but he is definitely. I mean, consider a guy. He's a guy who could be a top 5-ish pick in next year's draft. I think he absolutely will be a consideration there.
I think with a lot of those postseason All-America type teams, they are looking for the most impactful players on the best teams in the country. If Florida State is in the mix November, December, a lot of those voters are going to be watching the Seminoles. They'll probably watch an ACC Championship game round 2 if it's Florida State Clemson, for example. And a Jared Verse is a name that I would expect will be out there, not just because of what he can do, but because of Fabian Lovett and Braden Fisk and Patrick Payton, Daryl Jackson, who, God bless, I hope he gets a waiver at some point. Maybe NCAA will get that process through and make it happen before the season starts. But I think it's because of everything around Jared Verse. It's not just him. It's, oh my goodness, how does an offensive coordinator scheme against a Verse as well as everything else on that defense?
Yeah, he said he put on a little weight. I think like 6 or 7 pounds. Not a ton, but it can make a difference. And kind of like I was worried at first I was going to affect my speed a little. And he's like, no, I'm stronger and I'm faster, which is a scary proposition to say the least.
Yeah, guys, I think he's going to be in for a huge season. And just hearing him talk, the leadership that he and the defense, I think, will now have, that might be a storyline for the season where you have at every level, I think you've got leadership now on Florida State's defense, whether that's on the line, linebackers. And we'll talk about Kalen DeLoach in a minute, and in the secondary. And that's the unit for me that's going to have to, I think, perform because everybody feels pretty confident in the baseline of what this offense will be throughout the year. I think, injury luck aside, this offense is going to be a consistent force all year. It's going to be a top 5 offense in the country, in my opinion. And I think you've got a top 5 quarterback and you've got a top 5 receiving unit and an offensive line that might be as good as it's ever been in Tallahassee, right? Like it's as deep as it's been. And you have options there. They talked about potentially having 8 guys, right, that they could rotate throughout the season, which I think is kind of interesting because when's the last time you felt good about 4 Florida State offensive linemen, let alone 8?
And whether or not they do that, we'll see. I'm interested in what Alex Atkins will get him at the preseason luncheon, next Wednesday. I'm interested what he says on the matter. Whether that happens or not, the biggest thing to me is there shouldn't be the drop-off when the inevitable injury or 2 there happens. Because I feel like, 2013 was a year blessed by the gods where you had 5 really solid offensive linemen who I think really all played the entire season pretty much. But that's far from the norm. I feel like offensive line injuries always happen in the preseason, always happen throughout the course of a season. So, the depth they'll have there, I think whether they rotate 8 or not situationally, that depth is a massive deal just for the grind of a season.
And again, 8 was the magic number in 2020. Yep. We always heard it from Norvell, Dillingham, Atkins. They were trying desperately to get to 8. I think they got more than 8 too. So even if you have an injury in August, which again, we saw some of those last August, right? It feels like you can, knock on wood, overcome some of those injuries. Yeah, you've only got 1 bye week this year too, whereas you had 2 bye weeks last year. It's a little bit different shape of a season. So I think Florida State's in a really good spot on the offensive line. It kind of feels like, be curious to ask Alex Atkins, is this sort of the dream scenario where you've got those younger guys who have stayed with the program, they fought through those battles, they started as redshirt and true freshmen back in 2020, and now you've, again, brought in some transfers these last couple of cycles, and they're part of this group. It feels like a really cohesive group that enjoys the cross-training aspect, too, of being able to play different spots in the event of a need, whether it's injury or otherwise.
Yeah, that's a group too that's going to have to be good, right? And it's because, of what happens during a season at that position. And injuries are going to happen. You're going to need different combinations, guys who have been playing together, cross-training at different positions on that O-line. But to have that 8, I think, and maybe upwards of 10, allows you to sustain through a season where maybe, late in the year we're talking about FSU and Miami or FSU in Florida, and you're like, well, what does our depth look like right now? Because we're pretty beat up. And that Florida game always seems like at the end of the year, people ask, who's going to win it, it's really hard to predict preseason because it really at the end is a war of attrition and who has the healthiest roster, who has the most to play for, the rivalry aside with the emotions. A lot of things affect playing a team at the end. An O-line usually seems to be like a catalyst for who is healthiest at that point in the season when the Noles and the Gators meet up. So good to hear about the offensive line. Kalen DeLoach talked about the linebacking unit. Him and Tatum Bethune, I think, have given Florida State two of the better ACC linebackers in the conference and maybe as solid of a linebacking duo that Florida State has seen in maybe a decade within the last 10 years. There have been some good ones, but this is going to be up there, I think, in terms of comfortability going into the year.
Yeah, the caveat there being, I think beyond those two and DJ Lundy, there are real questions. It's not a ton of guys who've played a ton, which is kind of the wild card there. But yes, if they stay healthy, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, I think Tatum Bethune, obviously Kalen got picked to go to ACC Kickoff. Tatum Bethune got picked to break the rock today. It seems like those two have definitely made an impression on kind of the whole FSU staff this offseason. And yes, if they're healthy, I think Tatum kind of talked candidly when we talked to him a few weeks ago about he wasn't healthy. He was dealing with upper and lower body injuries last year that he was playing through. So I think a reset could do him good. And I think we've seen Kalen. I mean, Kalen's skill set, how many different things he can do. I think the two complement each other very well, where Tatum's a pretty good downhill linebacker and Kalen does things in space very well, can blitz, is pretty good in coverage for his size. I think is generally, I think it's a very complementary pair, considering we think we're going to see a lot of the two linebacker, kind of a 4-2-5 like we did last year.
I'll be curious, I'll maybe get this comment in before August when we can't really talk about injuries or how many reps backups are potentially getting in those camp settings. But, throughout the course of the season, how often will maybe Kalen DeLoach and Tatum Bethune will have to be limited in certain practices just to keep them as healthy as possible for game day? So you're going to be able to see, does a DeMarco Ward or a Blake Nicholson, a DJ Lundy, are those guys getting better through practices so they can make the most of some of those snaps on a game day situation? The health, trying to stay as injury-free is a weird word to say in football because as the season goes on, it just happens to everybody. But keeping Kalen and Tatum out there on the field as much as possible will be very important late October, November, and on and on. So very curious to see how the development, that practice, that on-field time for the younger guys allows for Kalen and Tatum to, they can manage their load later in the year.
Definitely something to keep an eye on. And fellas, let's wrap here over the next few minutes. Something that stood out to me, and you can kind of pick up on it. It's nothing that they said, but there is a confidence amongst this group, right? Like there's a quiet confidence of those guys that they don't have to come out there and beat their chests about how good Florida State is. They always say the truest confidence is usually quieter than it is louder. This group, I think, feels good about what they have in that locker room. You could kind of see it in the way they were walking, the way they were talking and joking around with each other. I think Jared Verse, after he was leaving the breakout session, started doing a freestyle rap for Florida State's cameras that were there to highlight the week. And it was cool to see. They're loose and they're relaxed. And I think the way that you have that is when you know what you have in the locker room, right, is pretty good. There seems to be like these guys are ready to get on the field and kind of show it, that they don't need to talk about it anymore. They don't care if Clemson's going to get a lot of people still picking them to win the league. You had Eric McLean on ACC Network, calling for Daddy's home to Florida State or something.
To be fair, though, he was the only one of the four who picked Clemson. The other three all picked Florida State.
There seemed to be there's still a little bit there, I think, amongst some of those media members, that it's like you want to beat them, you got to you want to be better than them, you got to prove it and beat them. And Florida State might have two chances there, where hey, maybe even in December we're back in Charlotte, Bank of America Stadium. And we're talking about that, but I liked it. I liked the way that the guys came in and handled their business. It was like a been there, done that. And let's get to the football season. Anything else stand out to you guys from the rest of the ACC as we were there for 3 days? Clemson, Miami, any notes from anybody else?
Yeah, I found it fascinating. I think last year it was there too with Mario Cristobal in Miami last year. They had some more expectations last year. I think people thought it was going to be a quicker turnaround over Mario. You didn't really hear him say the word rebuild. You did hear him say the word rebuild this year after a 5-7 season. I think kind of threw Manny Diaz, the coach before him, his predecessor, under the bus a bit, was kind of talking about what he said. He's like, we left a very successful team in Oregon to come do a rebuild in Miami. I think they've had to use the portal more than he wanted. Obviously, Mike Norvell, not the first person to use the portal, but it did feel a bit like they saw the example of how Florida State has gradually turned it around through the portal, and they, I think, added 16 through the portal. And I know Manny Navarro, the Athletic, I think 40 teams this year added 15 or more through the portal, which is pretty crazy. I mean, that's blown up lately. But yeah, they talk pretty candidly about calling it a rebuild and doing it the right way. They obviously are anxious to get another shot at Florida State in Tallahassee this year after kind of getting pantsed down in Coral Gables last year. But it'll be interesting to see how their season goes. I mean, they're not on the clock yet. I don't think Manny's not like on the hot seat of the season isn't what it could be, but it feels like you need to start seeing at least some progress, probably make a bowl at the very least.
I think on the flip side of the transfer portal discussion was Dabo Sweeney's response, which it was a really good question, I thought, from a media member about why philosophically aren't you in the portal as much, not just one cycle, but multiple cycles at Clemson. And I'm in agreement. I think Clemson should be in on some more transfers. It can make you better at certain positions. And we do have some questions, I think, about specific Clemson position groups, right? Dabo's response was more of, hey, we've got a higher retention rate. We've got, because of COVID, a lot of fifth-year guys, sixth-year guys coming back. Will Putnam's a good example on the offensive line. Tyler Davis and some others. So they've had maybe a higher retention rate. They haven't lost as many guys into the portal yet. We'll see how that shakes out. So I thought it was a really, again, a great question, but a good sort of nuanced response from Dabo just about he really didn't expect a lot of these veterans to come back for 2023. So it maybe changed his philosophy about how much he needed to, and maybe he would have been deeper into the portal had not some of these guys returned for the season.
One thing that stood out to me, too, guys, was Clay Klubnik. He really looked young. Like, it was the first time I'd been up close to him and asking him questions. And the difference between him and, like, Jordan Travis, obviously one's a grown man and one's still trying to figure himself out. And is a sophomore in college, am I right? Will be, so it's like.
Yeah, maybe even a redshirt freshman. Did he play in 4 games last year, or did he play in more than 4? I think he might even be a redshirt freshman.
Does he get that? Okay, so
I'm not sure.
Either way, second
He's
year.
a second-year player. Yes,
you just see it, and the way he answered questions was like very much like he's fresh, and it's his first time there. And Jordan Travis is this veteran, wily, experienced guy handling questions from national media, from local media, his own guys that are covering him, guys from other beats, Radio Row. I don't know if that's going to make a difference when FSU plays Clemson. It may not. Cade might come out there, and the talent is supreme, right? That kid won Elite 11. Like, he's a good quarterback, supreme talent. But is it going to come down to a fourth quarter where, J-Trav makes the plays in Death Valley or in Charlotte, the ACC Championship game? Does Cade throw a big pick? Does he handle, his teammates better as that war's going on into the fourth quarter on the sidelines? I'm interested. Like, I am really intrigued about how FSU has this veteran at quarterback that's kind of experienced and has dirt, knocked all over him for years. And Cade's kind of going through that now at Clemson, where it's like experiencing a little bit of disappointment. And Dabo said that, he's had some disappointment because Cade wasn't great last year in the handful of games that he played. He had one really good game in Charlotte, and I think some forgettable moments too. So it stood out to me. Like, you had a baby-faced kid out there who was taking it all in and just trying to answer questions by not messing up, right? You could tell he even said to me at one point, he goes, "I'm sorry, I know that wasn't the best answer." And it's just like, I get it. You're probably going to be back here next year again and maybe 2 more times. And I don't know. I don't know if I'm trying to parlay that into what'll happen on the football field. Maybe I'm trying to will it into existence where Jordan Travis ends up being the difference maker against the Tigers. But I don't know. Those are things I was looking for.
It ties into, for me, I think, you may have a story coming on it, Bob. I picked Florida State to win the ACC because I think they have less questions. There are some questions. There's the linebacker depth. There's how the offensive line settles. There's does Gerald Jackson get a waiver? There's how does the secondary kind of flush itself out this preseason? But I think next to Clemson, where there are more questions and where there is the real, like, if you don't start taking it back up soon, Clemson being like kind of the Clemson standard may have changed. They may not be a regular national title contender anymore. I think that there are more questions about the Tigers than Florida State, which is a big reason why I picked Florida State.
I think some of the questions about all these other contenders in the league, you may have a first-year, say, offensive coordinator. North Carolina has that. Clemson, Miami shook up its coaching staff. So you have a lack of continuity, whereas Florida State has continuity, not just on the roster, the coaching staff welcoming, just Patrick Surtain to replace Marcus Woodson. So a lot of experience coming back. You feel good about most of the position groups. Like you said, yes, you'd like to see linebacker be more stable, safety, more numbers at linebacker, I shouldn't say stable. Safety, you'd like to see a little bit more experience, a little bit more depth there. Special teams is a big question for Florida State. I think we were talking to David Hale about his position group ratings, and he had Florida State special teams at 10th in the conference. So yes, we still have some questions about Florida State, but overall, if you're listing all of the questions, we have the fewest going into August, going into the season about the Seminoles. I think that's a big reason for positivity.
People were asking us at the media party, and I was talking to Manny Navarro of The Athletic. I was like, listen, man, I know the depth isn't there. And Wes Durham was talking to us about how, like, he felt better about Clemson's 44, and 66 than Florida State's 44, 66 deep. And I went, listen, but that first 22, and if they stay healthy, let's talk about it, because I really don't think in the ACC there's a better first 22, right, combined than what Florida State's going to throw out there on both sides of the ball. Starting 11s. Excited, guys. It should be a lot of fun. It's cool to kind of go into one of these things and feel like all eyes are on the Noles, right? And that's what should happen. Talked to EJ Manuel for a little bit, and he was like, I'm going to be obnoxious this year if FSU's good on ACC Network. I can tell he's been waiting to get back at Eric McLean for the years that they've had to be on the set together. It was cool to see those guys. Eddie Royal, really high on Florida State this year. I almost brought up Florida State beating him in the ACC Championship game in Jacksonville in 2005 when Willie Reed had the big punt return back at the bank. Florida State. That was the inaugural ACC Championship game, I believe. I was there, the Dr. Pepper ACC Championship game, and Eddie Royal was over there with Virginia Tech, if I recall correctly. Lastly, let's end with this. I can't talk about it too much, but I can ask you guys. Charles Lester, Florida State, Colorado, tonight, 5-star deep. Come on now. This is a big one. Don't get Deion, boys. Come on.
Recruiting analyst Pat Burnham has already weighed in the comments.
There he is.
It seems like that's the consensus. It seems like it's, Colorado's kind of done everything in their power, but he's been to Florida State so much. They've had that relationship. Obviously the Colorado stuff kind of just came together over the last few months, and Colorado was trying to play catch up with Florida State and Alabama and Georgia. And I think they did pretty close, but it seems like barring some last minute stuff, it's going to go Florida State's way.
Yeah, this will be a big weekend for Florida State. We'll have coverage of the showcase. It'll be happening Saturday inside Doak. And, to Pat's point there about Lester and FSU, we were talking about this on the message board maybe a few days ago is, yes, defensive backs around the country want to play for Deion, but yes, Patrick Surtain is on Florida State staff too. And I think that was a great move by Mike Norvell. If you look at it from the framework of, hey, Patrick Surtain played in the NFL. He's got a son in the NFL. He's going to develop guys with technique that he's learned through the years from all these coaches. He's going to help put guys in the NFL too. So why not stay in state and play for Florida State? So I think Charles Lester and a lot of other guys are weighing these really tough decisions, but Patrick Surtain, this is a big get for Mike Norvell and the staff if they can bring in Charles Lester tonight.
You're right. Whoever he commits to tonight, I just don't think it's over, right?
Yeah,
Colorado, Deion's also proven that he's not going to stop just because a kid commits to a school. That's not going to end. He's going to go find as many streaming services as he can find that will give him an NIL deal. He'll find somebody like in China, I bet, who has a streaming service and offer some weird shoe deal if he can. That's just the type of guy he is. Pat, if he doesn't choose Florida State, I'm calling you upset tonight. I just want you to know I have put my full faith in the Osceola's recruiting analysis, and we are fully expecting this. Don't do this. You're going to get a phone call that will be very unpleasant if he goes to Colorado. Anyway, that's a good way to end this show. Good stuff, boys. I thought very, very informative. ACC kickoff, Wednesday practice kicks off, and I believe luncheon as well at that time. So you guys will have full coverage Monday. Probably have Pat and Fish back on with a combination of one of you guys or both of you guys and talk maybe some recruiting as well as what you're anticipating. But other than that, please subscribe to theosceola.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've been growing our social medias. We're on Instagram as well. Follow us on Twitter. And please, again, as always, share this with your friends. We appreciate you guys. This has been Seminole Sidelines. Bob Ferrante, Curt Weiler. I'm Ariya Massoudi. Have a great weekend, and hope you guys enjoy. Come on, Charles. Do this the right way. You know what you want to do. See you guys.